Thank you so much for coming and meeting me today. It's such a pleasure to be talking to you. I'll just ask a couple questions and you can answer them as you see fit. And I just want to know, like, what is your story and how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
So first, when did you start playing the piano and what inspired you?
Well, when I was about 4 years old, my grandmother gave my family a little upright piano. And so I don't really remember, but my parents tell me that from that moment, I was kind of always drawn to the piano. I was always going to the piano and kind of making up my own little songs and singing. And then I would apparently clap for myself and take a bow for myself. Um, so I didn't really start formal lessons until a little bit later because we moved a lot when I was a kid. So I think I started probably around first grade. I was 6 or 7. And then we moved, and then I changed teachers. So I got started probably around 7 and a half with formal lessons. And, that I do remember. I remember my very first lessons really distinctly. I remember loving to practice, which is not, I know now that I'm a piano teacher myself, I know that's not always the case, but I love to practice, and I just always felt drawn to the piano ever since the age of 4.
Wow. When did you realize that you wanted to pursue a career in music or specifically in piano?
Well, that definitely took a little bit longer because I don't think I really knew what that meant. And to be honest, even after I decided that's the route I wanted to go, I don't really think I knew what that meant. And so that's one of the reasons why I think what you're doing in creating this channel is so important, because I think it's essential to have at least an idea of what it means to make a career in music and how many different ways there are to make a career in music. Um, so I guess I probably started having the thought that I wanted to take it more seriously when I was 10 or 11, and then probably had pretty much made up my mind that I wanted to be a pianist by age 12, so around 7th grade.
How did you think about the trade-off between pursuing music versus having more financial security in a more mainstream career?
It's interesting. I get asked that question um, a lot, actually, by students of mine who are considering a career in music, and even by grad students who are already pursuing a career in music. They ask me that question, and it's kind of interesting to me because it's not ever something that I thought about when I was when I was deciding to become a musician. I don't know whether kids today are just more savvy or more aware of the financial sector, or the necessity to be financially secure. I don't know whether my parents just didn't stress that as a factor and other parents do. Um, but I never really was worried. It makes me sound like I was naive, and maybe in some ways I was, but I was really never worried about that. I had some sort of strange confidence that I would always have what I needed. Um, and so I think that, to me, I think it helped. I didn't spend a lot of sleepless nights worrying about whether I was making the right decision. I knew that it was the right decision. I knew that I wanted to become a musician, and I couldn't imagine my life any other way. And so that passion, I guess, kind of gave me that confidence to just go for it. So, I mean, what I would say now that I'm, in my 40s, and I see it from maybe a slightly different perspective, I have my own family. And of course, when you have your own family, there's pressure to provide and make sure that your own kids have what they need. Um, but what I would say is that I think it really depends on what you mean when you say, financial security, because nothing in life is actually secure, right? We don't know the future. We can't know the future. Um, and so I think that's also something that the pandemic taught all of us in all different fields, that you can think everything is so, tied up in a bow, and then something crazy can happen, like a global pandemic. And that affected so many industries that you would have, previously said were more secure than music. So I think that I would just say to those of, people who are considering a career in music, you can't know the future, but what you can know is what your passion is. And if your passion is music, you will find a way to have what you need. Um, Nothing is secure, of course, and it depends on what you think you need. I mean, I guess I'm very content. I have a house, I have a vehicle, I have the things. I don't need luxurious um, items in my life to be happy. So I think you just have to know yourself, and you have to know your passion, and make your decision that way.
That's a really interesting way to put it. Like, a lot of other people I've talked to, they're saying, "Oh, like I took a big risk," but what you're saying is you'll find a way to just follow your passion.
Yeah, I mean, maybe some other people would say that I'm naive, or that I've been, lucky or blessed, or whatever term you want to use. And I know that I have. I know that I've had a lot of things, that a lot of jobs kind of fall into my lap. I never felt like I was um, unable to find work. And maybe there are definitely people who have felt that way, so I'm not trying to minimize their struggles in any way. Just speaking from my own experience, I feel strongly that if you become the best that you can be, not the best in the world, doesn't have to be the best in the world, but the best that you can be, jobs will always come. Of course, you have to be flexible. If you're rigid about what you want to do, and you can only be happy doing one thing, as in, I won't be happy unless I have 250 concerts a year. Well, okay, then maybe this isn't the right career, because you have to be open to the possibility that that might happen, but that also might not happen. So, finding a way to be flexible and continuing to do what you love, but at the same time just fighting to be the best that you can be, I feel like you will make it. Like, everyone can make it if they follow that path. That's my view.
How much time did you dedicate to practicing and performing during your childhood and adolescence? And how did you balance your studies and piano?
So piano is a very demanding instrument. So I would say, when I decided to really get serious about it around 11 or 12, I was probably practicing an hour, maybe 90 minutes every day. Um, and I realized quickly that if I was going to jump into the world of competitions, and, more than one or two performances a year, or performance settings, I was going to have to up my practice time for sure. And that was all happening at the same time as kind of going towards middle school, and preparing for high school. So I probably started practicing in middle school around 2 hours, maybe two and a half on the weekends if I had extra time. Um, and then when I got into high school, I actually I was a day student, but I went to a boarding school. It was like a boarding slash day school, very rigorous college preparatory school. And that was probably the hardest time for me, because on the one hand, I had the pressure of, you're in 10th grade, your auditions are coming, they're around the corner, you need to be practicing 3 or 4 hours minimum per day. And then I also had, AP classes and preparing for the SAT and all these things. And I remember feeling, definitely stressed. Um, Probably I didn't get enough rest. But I also felt really determined. So I would do kind of crazy things to make it work. I remember we were required to do a sport, for example. So we were required to go to dinner. We had to all go to dinner as a group. So we were required to go to dinner, and we were required to do a sport. So if I did all of that, I wouldn't get home until approximately like 6:45 or so. And then I had from like 7 p.m. until bedtime to do all my homework and all my practicing. So what I managed to do for my senior year, for example, was I talked to my teachers and the administrators, and I asked them if I could do like an independent study for sports, so I could do it in the mornings before I was a runner. So I asked if I could run before classes started instead of after school. So things like that, just making adjustments. I feel like even though my school was not a music school, they were, you know, I wouldn't say they were happy to make accommodations, but they were willing to make accommodations when I presented my case. And then another thing that I remember doing is I would just practice the second I got home. I mean, if I had a test the next day, I just tried to block that fact out of my mind, and I would just practice, because I think playing the piano is such a complex activity and art form that I needed to be at my peak mental capacity, and I knew that. So if I had done all my homework and all my studying and then started to practice, there's just no way that I could have focused. So I would always do piano first. And then, there were definitely some sleepless nights where I stayed up a long time, studying for my AP chemistry test or whatever it was. But a lot of times I would go to bed like by 10:30. I would practice, from whenever I got home until 10:30, 11, and then I would just go to bed, and I would wake up the next morning. I'm not saying this is necessarily good advice, but I would wake up the next morning and I would do my homework or do my studying like really early in the morning. I was always a morning person, so I knew that if I stayed up past too late, then I was just going to be exhausted. So I would do a lot of my academic work in the morning, and I tried to do my sports in the morning. So I was getting up pretty early, like 5 in the morning, and then getting as much done as I could, and then in the evenings is when I would practice. So, or the early evening is when I would practice. So I think everyone just has to kind of make a priority list, and for me, piano was number one priority. It was more important to me than my grades. I was able to get pretty good grades, but piano was always first, and I knew that I needed to be at my peak mental capacity. So I think that the advice I would give to someone trying to juggle all that is try to figure out when are you at your best. Maybe some people would do better practicing piano or practicing their instrument first thing in the morning. Or maybe they have a study hall, if they're not a pianist and they can carry their instrument, maybe they have a study hall and they can use that hour to practice. Talk to the administrators and teachers and see if there's a way within the school day to fit some in, and just things like that. And I think that with other instruments, it's not maybe quite as demanding in terms of just the pure hours. String instruments, of course, you have to practice a lot, but voice, for example, you couldn't really practice for a 3-hour stretch because it wouldn't be so healthy for your voice. So yeah, I think there's always ways around it. It's just making time and getting support from other people, to make what is important to you happen.
How did your parents react to your juggling all of your like academics and piano and your determination to do piano?
I was very, very, very fortunate. My parents were so supportive of me from the beginning. They, of course, they always wanted me to do my best. They would always say, whatever you do it with all your might, with all your heart. So they, in that sense, it wasn't like they would have been supportive if I started failing my academic classes or something like that. But they were definitely more on the supportive and rewarding side. So if I brought home a report card with A's, they would reward me rather than threatening me that if I didn't do that, I was going to get in trouble. And they always, they were my biggest fans. They were always telling me, anything you set your mind to, you can do it. So I had 2 cheerleaders in my house that were my parents for sure, and they definitely made sacrifices to support my dreams. My senior year, I wanted to attend Manhattan School of Music pre-college. We lived about 3 hours away from New York City at the time, or 2 hours on the train. And so, that was another huge tuition that they had to find money for on top of the college preparatory tuition. And they had to allow me to take the train in by myself, and it was a lot, but they really were supportive. And I know I know that not all parents are like that. I've had enough experience with my own students and with students that I come across in festivals that I direct that, a lot of parents, all parents parent differently and no parent is perfect. So there, a lot of parents have a different approach and there's a lot of pressure um, on the kids to be perfect academically and to have a backup plan if they're thinking of becoming a musician. That's great, but if it doesn't work out, they want them to also get a 1600 on the SAT. And so I know that I was really fortunate and privileged to have the parents that I have. um, but I think that underneath all the different parenting styles, for the most part, parents really do love their kids and want the best for them. So I feel like if there's a converse, if someone's really, really serious about pursuing music and the parents are not as supportive, maybe, I think having a really heart to heart conversation and not necessarily trying to convince the parents, but just connect with them and explain, how important it is for you for their lives and all of those kinds of things. How much passion there is behind the desire to become a musician. I do feel like most parents can eventually come around. Um, and that pressure and maybe trying to dissuade the child is usually just coming from a place of trying to protect them. Um, Even if it's misguided. So yeah, I was really, really, really lucky. I know that I was, and I owe a lot to my parents for sure.
For students who are unsure about whether they will be successful, what factors should they consider when deciding if they should fully commit to a career in music or if they should pursue something else that they know that they would make more money or be also good at?
Well, I think my biggest advice, I guess I have two things to say to that. One would be, can you imagine your life doing something else and being totally content? You know, if you can imagine yourself not having time for music or not having nearly as much time, and spending a lot of hours doing something else that's maybe not your primary passion, but you might be good at, um, if you can imagine that, then it's definitely something to at least consider. In my case, I couldn't imagine myself doing anything else. There were other things I could have done, you know, I just knew I didn't want to. I didn't want to wake up every day doing something that I was good at but I didn't truly love. I'd rather struggle and, because at the piano it's like a beast, it's constantly showing back um, all of your imperfections and all of your shortcomings, and you have to constantly master the instrument, and constantly fail. Literally day by day as we practice, we're failing and then getting a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better. Um, so it's not easy to be constantly struggling with something like that. When you're pursuing excellence, it's going to be a struggle. But and that's true in any field. I don't mean that it's only with piano, but for me, I knew that I would rather do that and love what I was doing than to do something that I might be good at, but was just kind of my second or my third choice. So I think that's the first thing. Try to imagine both paths, and could I be content, or is music really my primary passion? And do I want to live and breathe music every day of my life? And if the answer is yes, I want to live and breathe music every day of my life, the rest I think will really the pieces of the puzzle will start to fall into place. The other thing I would say is that you have to really be specific when you define success. Like, what does success mean? Does success mean making a certain, figure salary? Does success mean that you have a certain number of concerts per year? Or does success mean that you wake up every day, you love what you do, um, you make a living, a comfortable living, and you have what you need? So it's just kind of, I think success is kind of a slippery word. It means something a little different to every person. So there are people, I have known colleagues who, are really bitter actually in this profession because they haven't gotten their definition of success. And I've got other colleagues who have actually changed careers late in life because they couldn't get the one little sliver of thing that they wanted out of the field. And they would rather have none of it than not have that one thing, you know? So for me, I guess I'm fortunate. I enjoy so many aspects of the career. I love performing. I love teaching. Um, I I do a lot of administrative work with festivals that I direct. I don't love the administrative part, but I love creating events. I love bringing people together and, running concert series or festivals. And so while I might not like, sending emails, I love the experience of having everyone come together and just breathing and inspiration for a few weeks every year, So I've been able to find so much joy in all these different avenues. And I think that that's really how I define success. So if you can define success in a way that makes sense to you and you can figure out really what you need, what you think you're going to need in your life to be content, I think that's the only way to really answer that question because every single person is different.
Can you share a particularly challenging or transformative moment in your musical journey that influenced your development as a pianist?
Ooh. So many. That's hard to just choose one. Um, hmm. I would say probably the last 6 or 7 years have been the most challenging time of my career. And there are a few reasons, without getting super personal. I think one huge change is trying to balance being a musician and having it's almost like when you're a musician you don't stop working ever. Like when you're not teaching you need to practice, and when you're not practicing you need to, in my case, I need to do some administrative work and have meetings and have coffee with people and network, and there's just so many avenues. So having a job that's so multifaceted and quite consuming or can be quite consuming it's been difficult to learn how to balance that with having a family, and it's been difficult to learn how to set boundaries in both areas, setting boundaries on my profession but also being able to say, okay, I'm not a bad mom if I don't pick up my kids from school every day because I can't, because I'm teaching. Right? So finding that balance, I think, has been a really big struggle. It's an ongoing struggle and also a journey. It's led to actually a lot of self-exploration and healing in a strange way. So I think that's probably one of the reasons. And then, of course, the pandemic was really tough on everybody. Um, but being at home for, basically a year with very small children and not being able to touch the piano hardly at all, because at the end of the day, I was just so exhausted. And I think everybody's mental health took a big hit during that time. Um, that was probably one of the hardest times of my life. I was seeing other colleagues of mine who maybe didn't have families who, granted, I'm sure they were very lonely, and I was never lonely during the pandemic because I had my family, so I was grateful for that. But having them say, "Oh, it was so great to be stuck at home. I learned the entire Goldberg variations and you know 6 Liszt etudes," and I'm sitting here going, "I haven't touched the piano because I'm changing diapers." It was just there was such a dichotomy of how everyone experienced it, um, and so that was very frustrating and very, very difficult. And I'm sure that there was definitely some elements of anxiety and depression that happened, but it also allowed me to reprioritize my own life. And it made me realize that while I am a musician and piano is the number one thing in my life besides my family, I can also find meaning in other things. You know, I'm not only just a pianist, and if I cannot play the piano, it doesn't, you know, for a while, it doesn't mean that I'm not a musician. It doesn't mean that I'm suddenly not worth anything, and I am worthy, you know, even away from the piano. So it was just a lot. And I think that now coming out of that and sort of rediscovering, you know, performing again and teaching in person again, even though it's been a few years back in the sort of normal rhythm of things, I think we're all still healing from that time period. You know, I can't even imagine what it was like to be a kid during that time period. You know, especially someone of your age, because you know you remember virtual school. It's not like you were two when that was happening. So you know, it's just crazy. I think for everyone it was a really difficult, um, but also transformative and in some ways really beautiful experience to go through that.
This is the last question, but what advice would you give to aspiring young pianists who are hoping to achieve success in the field of classical music?
That's a great question. I would say, you know, one thing that I think I didn't do enough when I was exploring the possibility of pursuing music, I think I didn't ask enough questions. So you are doing the right thing already. Um, I think I just either was intimidated by, you know, professionals in the field, or was naive enough to think that I knew enough already. But surrounding yourself with mentors, finding mentors that will be willing to give you either lessons or coachings or just conversation to talk about what it's like and asking a lot of questions. I think that's so important. You build communication skills, you garner all kinds of knowledge, um, and then just using other resources that are available. There are so many resources available now with technology and just the global connections that are so quick. You know, I mean, it's crazy. You can have a website and just immediately translate it, or you can email someone who lives in, you know, Morocco and have an answer within an hour. You know, it's just so different than it was even when I was going through high school. So I think just using the resources and the technology and the mentors around you and asking lots of questions, I think that can really help guide, you know, guide the decisions and guide the paths. And then another thing that I would say, this is kind of maybe more basic, but it could lead to those other things. I would say research a lot of summer programs, because that's an opportunity to immerse yourself in music when you're not dealing with all the academic pressures as much, and kind of get a feel for what it might be like to be a musician, you know, full time. So, you know, for example, I had a student who went to a piano festival in Bowdoin this summer, and the amount of progress that she made in 3 weeks was literally like what she would normally do in 2 months, because she just got so inspired. She was surrounded by chamber music and other great musicians and amazing teaching. Um, so those kinds of like peak experiences in the summers, I think, are something that everyone should pursue. And look for, like I said, look for those mentors. And those summer festivals are sometimes a really good place to find them.
Thank you so much for meeting me. This is so amazing. Like it's such a pleasure. This meeting was super helpful for me, and I'm sure it's going to be super helpful for everyone else as well. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for thinking of me and for all your great questions.